Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this weekly dialogue with the new Untouchables. I'm proud to say, and I can't believe things are going so fast, but they're spinning out of control at the same time. This is the 65th episode of the new Untouchables, and we are recording this on Friday, March 27th, 2026 at approximately 5 p.m. Eastern, as really the world is, I don't know, you can fill in your own metaphor, your or epitaph, unfortunately, depending on where you're sitting. But I would like to introduce the group first and get rolling here. So on the upper left of my screen, and I always apologize if this moves on you because of the nature of Zoom, but we've got William K. Black, the former regulator, most known for writing the book, The Best Way to Own a Bank is to Rob One, which I find incredibly prescient, all things that we're in the midst of at the moment. But William K. Black is one of the foremost regulators in the history of the United States.
Bill, I think that's also true. Yeah.
I think you mix it up a little bit there.
No, but
Patrick.
yeah, I mean, I think you can own a bank by robbing one, and you can rob a bank by owning one.
Oh, well,
I
did I
think it
get that
works. I
inverted?
think it works. I think it works both ways.
Whoops. Well, sorry about that. Now the game has shifted, but of course, William K. Black, a professor, expert in criminology at the University of Minnesota, formerly at the University of Kansas City, Missouri, as well as being one of the nation's foremost elite regulators and an expert in the economy and all things legal apparatus and regulation and all things corruption. Now on the top of my screen, I've got to the upper left, Mark Dann, the former Attorney General of the state of Ohio, currently in private practice at Dan Law, leading the fight on behalf of consumers and truth for citizens. To his right, it looks like on my screen, it's Paul Pelletier, the decades-long veteran of the Department of Justice, currently in private practice as well, and also an adjunct professor at George Washington University. And then on the lower right, we have June Carbone, the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. And then, of course, rounding us out is none other than Lewis Clark, the Executive Director of the Government Accountability Project. And as we find ourselves on this particular Friday, chaos ensues, as it always does, as we are able to endeavor, based on your expertise, all of the things that we're in the midst of. But I want to just give us a couple of headlines first, because it is pretty unnerving, all things considered. But House rejects DHS funding bill as White House orders agency to pay TSA workers. Interesting to see the workaround. Not exactly sure what that's all about, but I remember a couple of billionaires lining up to pay service members, of course, in one of the early, I think it was actually pre-Venezuela during the government shutdown. Then Florida's immigration crackdown is showing cracks. We're hurting people. Global food supply faces dangerous bottleneck in the Strait of Hormuz. Obviously, stocks slide into the fifth week. Weekly losses. Investors are losing patience with the Iran war, for the affordability crisis and inflation and all other things regarding our economy. It looks like we are in a death spiral. And underneath that, is this what the death throes of the fossil fuel era look like? I thought that was pretty telling. But moving forward, also, I love this picture that I just discovered right before I hit play. But look at the white faces, obviously, and obviously our leadership at the within our military. And I think that picture was taken back when everybody was brought into a previous address by both Trump and Hegseth. But it says here, Hegseth strikes 2 black and 2 female officers from promotions list. And it goes on and on and on. And I just want to say this in preparation for the nation responding with the No Kings rally, where we're expecting millions of people to pour on the streets. And by the way, in June, in Bill's hometown of Minneapolis, Minnesota, might be the center point of everything, especially with Bruce Springsteen performing and other very, shall we say, notable influencers across the country are descending upon Minneapolis. But you can check out this, obviously, this website. If you do want to participate and get out there to join the rally, you can check it out at nokings.org. But guys, let's start the conversation off, I think, right in the belly of the beast with you, June. What does it feel like on the ground, and what are your priorities as we respond to everything that we're seeing play out?
The word of the day, enshittification. Um,
when after Trump's election, Bill can tell you, I started musing, what we really need is an Old Testament prophet to say, people of the United States, repent. You have followed the false orange idol. What will take place? Your crops will be dying in the fields with no one to harvest them. And what pestilence will sweep the land? That you admire, the US military will crumble before your eyes. The American economy, which powers the world, will be undermined. And before long, your children will either rebel against you or be caught up in the maelstrom. I mean, that's what I wrote right after the election. And we're now seeing something that probably exceeds Putin's most feverish dreams for what Donald Trump would be like as president of the United States. And we shouldn't forget that among the many acts of perjury Pam Bondi committed when she testified before Congress, she said there was no evidence that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. BS. Mueller Mueller very clearly documented Russian interference, even if he did not find evidence sufficient to convict Donald Trump of conspiracy to arrange for Russian interference. And so what you have is the destruction of the strongest parts of the American tradition, the things that have worked. And the military, I can't help but comment on your picture, Patrick. We had a talk this week about DEI, the business case for DEI in corporate America, et cetera. And there are two parts to the DEI story. The people who like to complain about it, complain about being forced to hire somebody and going through a search and having trouble finding the right people. But they don't look at it from the other end. The data we had when we assembled the material on the business case for diversity is in today's world, when you find a large institution that is overwhelmingly white and male, there are only two possible explanations. Cronyism, that includes selection for loyalty and incompetence over efforts to have a better functioning system, or collusion to commit fraud or other misdeeds. And I leave it to you which Hegseth is doing at the Department of Defense.
See, all of the above.
Well, I was going to say, Mr. Black, that your colleague and your partner in life and in just incredibly insightful understandings of how this whole situation works just dropped, I think, one of the more powerful openings that we've had in a series of never-ending powerful openings and revelations by this group. But you are the foremost expert in fraud and what is transpiring in light of no kings, and what you have laid out many, many times before on these podcasts is that there has to be an element of no robber barons. It's not just no kings, it's no robber barons. I might even add no plantation owners of the Confederacy. Anything about tyranny in light of the 250th anniversary, but in your backyard in Minneapolis is going to be the zeitgeist of this national movement. And here you are, Bill. I'd love to hear, what's the follow-up to June?
Well, the immediate takeoff on all of this is that on top of that, the Trump administration is going all out to honor this visiting delegation from Russia and has released Russia from sanctions at a time when it was in a terrible strategic fix because of the incredible bravery and success and ingenuity of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians who now are the world's experts in drones and in shooting down drones. The Ukrainians who promptly volunteered to try to help protect the United States. Instead, we've withdrawn, I think the count is from 13 bases U.S. military bases are not viewed as safe. Think of that, the paradox of that, right? These are the entities that are supposed to keep other people safe. They're not safe. Why? Well, two reasons. One, because these strikes on Iran have not only pissed off Iran, but they have failed to destroy vast numbers of weapons that can reach the United States and other folks at ranges of 1,000+ miles. And second, because Putin, former KGB agent, has the very successful successor to the KGB, providing precise targeting information. And when I say precise targeting information, which portion of a wall of a consulate to hit that has the CIA station chief and his assistants. All right. Incredible levels of tradecraft in all of that. And so it is no longer safe for the military, much less for other people who aren't the military. And Trump has rewarded, in response to this attacks, has rewarded Putin and condemned and gone out of his way to insult and attack Zelensky and to seek to undermine Ukraine's ability to defend. And why? Nobody thinks it's ideology. Everybody's answer is corruption. And they're willing to toss the American people and much of the global economy under the bus. So look for who's winning. And now it is absolutely standard that before Israel or the United States launch a major new military attack, that information is used by insiders in the so-called prediction markets or sometimes in futures to pass trades like 7 minutes before the attacks are going in. And these supposedly have produced billions of dollars in profits. That's this combination. When you get this kind of administration, you get the combination of all these factors: massive incompetence, massive traitor behavior, and massive corruption on top of that ineptitude. And the result is now that unquestionably Trump is the greatest threat to the world that the United States has ever produced.
Wow. And that was the perfect follow-up to one of the most profoundly powerful openings and then secondary offerings to that. And Paul, I'm going to put you on the spot because you've been delivering those sorts of powerful right hooks every step of the way from the very beginning. But the way I want to try to tee you up on this is because, look, the question this week, as it has been over the last many weeks, is again, let's call it the desecration of the Department of Justice. You know, we continue to see these elements of the suspicious activity reports that played out in all of these scenarios with some of the world's largest financial institutions as it relates just in this specific storyline, Epstein, right? And I saw this week further information, or I should say depositions from Richard Kahn, the accountant for Epstein, and then of course the attorney Darren Endike, I believe his name was. And by the way, I never heard of Darren Endike before this, right? But then of course we've all heard about Kenneth Starr and whose name's eluding me at the moment, Dershowitz, among others. I mean, it's amazing to go from Darren Endike to those guys, all things Epstein. But my question to you, Paul, and of course you're going to go wherever you want, and I encourage you to do so. But the long and the short of it is, right now, I'm seeing now out of nowhere for other Department of Justice members running for office. For example, in your neck of the woods, Virginia, I believe his name is J.P. Cooney, and of course he worked within Merrick Garland's with Jack Smith in terms of all the things the the case down in Mar-a-Lago and so forth. But he's talking about straight up corruption from the inside, what the Trump administration has done illegally, with apparently this platform that's going to hold the administration accountable if we ever get the House back, but without saying it. I'm curious how you address this situation of former prosecutors potentially getting into the race of the midterms.
Well, I mean, look, prosecutors getting in the race is always a good thing, but the question, what I would say to you is, and again, borrowing off of Bill's argument, corruption is the problem here, right? It is an administration that lives by corruption, and where truth is unimportant, right? Truth is completely irrelevant. There's no bottom to these people. I mean, just watching Trump every day describe the war and the arrangements he's made with people that he just makes up out of whole cloth. There's no basis to any of it. So, at some point in time, certainly it impacts our world partners, right? To the extent we have anymore. But when he comes on TV on day one, and the press doesn't pick up on a lot of this stuff, but he comes on and say, we have a lot of people that want to join us in stopping the Strait of Hormuz problem, and I don't want to tell you what their names are, but there's a lot of them lining up. And then by the end of the week, there's nobody. And he's been telling the world, he says a whole bunch of people lining up. And the same thing with, they gave me a beautiful big gift. What the hell is he talking about? So it is obviously the musings of a lunatic, right? And no one's calling him on this. But I think that the American people are seeing this. And the only question I have is, has this corruption that Bill talked about and that we all see on a daily basis, are there people in the administration that are going to affect the byproduct of that corruption? And one of the byproducts of that corruption is going to be, are we going to have elections, right? And what are those elections going to look like? Already this week, we've seen that they've tested putting ICE at voting places, right? They're talking about that as if it's a real thing and a real problem. Mike Johnson talked about it. We've talked about getting rid of mail-in voting, and we've talked about putting an act in play that pretty much denies poor people and women the right to vote. And so they're serious about all this stuff. And my only hope is that the American people start reacting in a way that politically they can't do that. And right now it seems like some of the stuff politically isn't going to happen. And so, and we see the impact of it, right? In Trump's hometown, a blue Democrat was elected to take the place of a red seat in a seat that he had won by 12 points, right? On a Trump endorsed candidate. So I think the American people are reacting to it. And the question is are they going to react enough? And I think this weekend is important to show that. Remember, before the last No Kings, the Republicans were coming out, making fun of it, all these pejoratives about it, and all, terrorists, and Democrats were terrorists and all that. You haven't heard a peep from them about the No Kings this time because it backfired on them. So I think I think they're seeing what's happening with all this corruption. And I think part of what's happening is that people are reacting to it. And then finally, what June and what we have been saying for a long time on this podcast is that it's the economy, stupid, right? So all of the shit that he's been doing, it doesn't infect the economy right away in a way that we're going to see it, but it's beginning to bubble up all over. And of course, the war with Iran is impacting that. But all the fact that there's no job growth, the fact that manufacturing jobs are gone, the fact that GDP is down, this is all as a result of his corruption, his tariffs, and his mismanagement of a thriving economy. I mean, inflation's up to 4.2% now. So there's only so much that the American people of his bullshit that the American people will actually take, at least those people that are MAGA. And I really think it's eking into the Republican ecosystem, at least as it relates to elected politics. And ultimately, I think that's going to have an impact. And so if we can fend off, if we can fend off the legislation to deprive women and poor people of the right to vote, if we can fend off the legislation to get rid of mail-in voting, I think that there's that if we can topple those two initiatives that Trump is hell bent on getting in, then I think that the foothold we're going to get is going to be in the next election. I think that there will be a number of prosecutors. I think there's 20 or 25 federal prosecutors running in races across federal races across the country for Congress. And I think if they can saturate Congress, I think that there's at least a potential for at least putting guardrails around what's going on. This war is out of control. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I'm looking to guardrails going on. And I know that Lewis is going to be a very busy man over the next 24 months.
Outstanding. And Mr. Dan, I'm going to tee you up first before we get to Mr. Clark, because you have identified from the beginning all of the elements. Like the Bar Association has to step up. You've identified every aspect of what's affecting consumers, particularly from the tariffs on in. And then yet you have this incredible experience, of course, being an attorney general of Ohio and all things dealing with massive racketeering. And yet you have also said that the Democratic Party has yet to exemplify the opportunity that Trump is giving everybody on a platinum platter, right? Of this incredible insanity in every direction. Nobody can escape it. Nobody doesn't feel this. Mark, your thoughts moving forward.
Well, I think this week, kind of under the radar, and again, some of this stuff is kind of it's a direct trigger for the corrupt activity, like the Kalshi betting and that stuff. Some of it is a diversion away from what they're really doing, and why they would do this, because I think it's going to really backfire on them. We saw multiple efforts in the federal regulatory structure to deregulate mortgage-backed securities of the type that fueled the 2008 financial crisis. So Fannie and Freddie have rolled back rules. So many of the same signs are there. The news this morning is that the 90-day that there are more people since 2022 that are in delinquent 90 days on their mortgage than since 2022. So we've got a climbing delinquency rate for people in mortgages. We have people who are carrying a huge consumer debt burden in this country, which also, so when the subprime mortgages start to be marketed again, it provides a convenient outlet for all that credit card debt that people have accumulated and haven't been able to pay, and that's at record levels right now too. And in the meantime, the Wall Street folks are profiting off of all this. But they want back at the mortgage business. They want to get those privately securitized mortgage-backed securities back to be the norm. And we've been blessed since 2011. Well, from 2009 to 2011, there just weren't any mortgages being underwritten. But from 2011 on, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, with strict guidelines and rules, governed the origination of mortgages in this country till very recently. But that's all about to change, kind of right in front of our eyes. So I think that some of it is related to the grift, but some of it's also a diversion from the grift that's going on. But at the end of the day, this is being accelerated to the point where should we be able to hold free and fair elections in 2026, these economic disasters are going to start exploding all around Trump and the Republicans on the ballot this year, while this is going on. And it could be a real. I mean, the winds were favorable before, but politically, these things are. There are people that are really suffering and in distress, and then they do these amazing demonstrations of callousness towards working class and middle class people. And number one being the way that the TSA workers have been treated in this country. I mean, there's nobody more working class in America right now than TSA agents who haven't been paid for 41 days. And Patrick, you talked about the bar stepping up. We're partnering now with. We just announced this afternoon with the Cleveland Bar Association. We're going to provide counseling in debt related issues, credit related issues, mortgage related issues for free to TSA workers throughout Ohio and Kentucky, where we have offices and we practice. And the Cleveland Bar heard about the idea and joined with us on that today. And so we're going to do a seminar, and we've created an email address of tsahelp@danlaw.com, where we can answer those questions that people have about how to navigate what's going on, because the predators are already lining up. The payday lenders. I mean, where do you think these TSA agents are? How are they meeting their food budgets? How are they going to put Easter dinner on the table? They're going to be borrowing money, and there's a raft of predatory consumer lenders out there that are waiting for them. And after that, behind them are the debt settlement companies that are going to take huge profits at the expense of these working class people. And these were all industries that strongly supported Trump and his election. But so at the end of the day, this is all going to fall down. And hopefully we can highlight at least and help a few people. I mean, it's kind of the starfish theory. We can't help all the TSA workers, but we can help the ones in front of us in our neighborhood to make sure that they get through this crisis with their house and with their families intact and their children fed and able to pay for their prescriptions. So that's where we're at. And then on the bigger, and then you combine that and the way working class people are being treated, and then the deregulation of all of the things that are in place to protect people. All of the attack on junk fees that the Biden administration put in place have all been repealed. The CFPB has been decommissioned. The one thing that they hadn't screwed with at the CFPB was the database for people to be able to make complaints, the complaint database. They've now created a series of impediments to people making a complaint on the database. Fraud warnings and deterrent steps that people have to go through to be able to actually go through and file a complaint. But I never in the history of America, at least in the 40 plus years I've been paying attention to government and politics, has anybody been so blatant and open in their hatred of regular working class and middle class people and their disdain and their lack of concern, because they're taking these affirmative actions that are easy to understand. They're making it harder to make a complaint against a company that screws you. They're standing up. For example, a couple of weeks ago, and I know it's the third time I've mentioned it over 3 weeks, but I think it's the epitome of what's going on in the Trump administration. The Ticketmaster NationStar merger was attacked by the Justice Department and a group of state attorneys general. And in the middle of the night, without the knowledge of the line lawyers in the Justice Department Antitrust Division that were trying the case, the lobbyists and the top levels of the Trump Justice Department settled the case with NationStar. With Ticketmaster and Live Nation for nickels, for less than a day's profits, um, and walked away from the trial, leaving the attorneys general to have to figure out how to try a case that they weren't intending to try. And you know what? Those guys, to their credit, including some Republican attorneys general, they're pushing forward. And they're gonna. The judge said, we're not going to continue this trial. Go to work, finish the job, finish the trial, and I think the AGs may get substantial relief for consumers. But if any of you are fans of music and have bought tickets to concerts recently, I mean, the prices are just prohibitive, and to the point where unless you're very rich, you can't get a good seat at a concert in America. Well, I don't know how much tolerance people are going to have for that. So what they've got left is trying to stop the election from being fairly conducted. They failed today because the Senate, the DHS budget out without addressing this Vote America, this attack on women and poor people voting, that seems so important to Trump and his folks. But that bill, I can understand more and more why they're so focused on the election stuff again. Because if people are voting on the substance and the realities of their lives, those guys are fucked. The only way they win this election, now I'm gonna sound like our great orange president, but the only way they can win this election is to cheat. But that's literally the case at this point. There is no. We have millions and millions of people who are pissed off because they've been harmed by what this administration has done to them, to the benefit of Trump and his billionaire buddies and his children, and his own personal enrichment. Uh, uh, I can tell you that there aren't people in my neighborhood that if they get convicted of a crime can buy themselves a pardon. But people down the street if you live in the right neighborhood, or you're a member of Mar-a-Lago, or a like country club, you can, for $1 million in this country, you can buy yourself a pardon. I don't think people are going to stand for that. So their only chance to avoid an absolute wipeout in the 2026 election is to cheat. And so the question is, how are we going to make sure that that the rule of law is enforced to make sure that doesn't happen? But I think we can't start too soon. I mean, we're only, it's the third month of the year, and so we're 8 months away from election day.
Wow. And Louis, your colleagues have definitely presented some mind-boggling, profound points. And of course, your colleague, William K. Black's got the T-shirt on, or I should say the sweatshirt, that was inspired by whistleblowers. It says, "We saw." Can you pull that down? We saw something, we said something, and then things got weird. That was in context to the Bank Whistleblower United project that brought together some of the key whistleblowers that you actually represented, Louis, in terms of Richard Bowen comes to mind first and foremost, which is where we were able to meet up with you. I'm wondering, considering all of these incredible points that leave us on the edge, again, nobody understands what's happening on the inside more than you and your organization. What is your response to your colleagues?
Well, I'm feeling a profound sense of hope, actually, because I think we've been presented with some very large issues, which are and trends, and obvious assaults on democracy, and prevailing and expanding really corruption. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who are responding to that. And that's what we're seeing. I guess that's where our morale, our high morale in our office comes from, because there's so many people coming forward. And these people, like never before, they face, in the case of attorneys who are blowing the whistle, which are a number, we're representing a number of them at the Department of Justice, at the FBI as well, and also now other agencies as well, attorneys who, of course, have to worry about their bar association, their bar membership, the fact that they're vulnerable to being attacked as, as violating the attorney-client privilege, etc. And so they face a lot of threat. They also face, as we see too, threats of retribution and criminal investigation potentially as well. So they, despite all these threats, they're coming forward. I mean, they're groups of them coming forward. We've had last year alone, not even the entire year, but most of the year, 1,500 people or 1,700 people now coming forward to blow the whistle, can possibly represent all those folks. But at the same time, we're able to take on some very significant cases, put it that way. And there's like groups of people at FEMA who are blowing the whistle on the fact, or at least what they say is the fact that the agency is incapable of actually rising to the occasion to take care of a situation like Katrina, where, where one disaster would totally wipe out. They wouldn't be able to respond to it. We have 15 now, and I think even as many as 20 people at EPA who are blowing the whistle on that agency's inability to do its job. We have FBI agents blowing the whistle on absolute violations of the First Amendment. Investigating investigating peaceful demonstrators who have not violated anything other than they're just coming out and making noise, and they're being investigated by the FBI, and they're resisting. We have all kind of people at the Department of Homeland Security who are blowing the whistle on what's happening within the detention centers. And then on top of that, in the Senate, we have Senator Grassley, who is, he's really getting behind a number of whistleblower reforms that would actually help federal employees go right into district court if they're retaliated against. So even people within the GOP are definitely on the side of whistleblowers. And the court system, we just won two major victories at Voice of America, in terms of essentially ruling that every decision that Carrie Lake, who is head of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which has overseen Voice of America and a bunch of other broadcast operations for our government, everything that she's decided for the last 12 months is now null and void. And then the next ruling just last week, where all of a sudden the judges ordered everyone back to work. And so we're working out at what, right now it's going to be 70 people a week, which isn't enough, but it's going to, we'll probably find that acceptable. So they're going back to work, despite an incredible effort to try to keep them out and and then we just filed suit last week in a new lawsuit, at which we have discovered we have lots of whistleblowers amongst those who are still at Voice of America. It's just this handful of people still there. But what they've been doing for the last year has been violating the firewall, where you're supposed to separate the political people who run the organization or run the agency from the editorial decisions about what's actually going to be broadcast. In other words, guaranteeing journalistic, unbiased rules, which are by statute. And essentially what's happened over the last year is all the wire services have been canceled, and the only wire service that Voice of America employs right now is extreme right wing. So we have just essentially a disinformation operation that is trying to get off the ground, but I don't think they're going to be able to do it. And we have the same judge who's just given us these two other victories. So I see the judiciary standing up, and I think things are beginning to crack in terms of Congress. The shadow hearings are getting significant attention, which is essentially the minority of various committees of Congress are holding their own hearings, and they're getting attention. And then perhaps next year, depending on what happens with the elections, the actual hearings are. And believe me, we're prepared to go forward. Whoever happens to run Congress next year and this year too, obviously, we're ready for hearings. And the more of this information that comes out from the whistleblowers who are on the scene, I think that it's going to create a, a countervailing force to the corruption.
Wow, Miss Carbone, I have to say, I smiled throughout half of what Lewis had just revealed there, because to me, again, it sort of encompasses what I perceive the rest of you to uphold: this incredible professionalism and tenacity, but your commitment to really integrity and liberty and the truth, really based on what we are supposed to be as Americans. You always like to end on a positive note. We've got a little bit of time here left. I'm curious how you respond to Mr. Clark in that wonderful revelation, all things considered, between the tapestry of this dark force of just stupidity and incompetence and corruption.
Well, the question is, what is rebuilding going to look like? So back when we were only talking about a financial disaster, you can imagine rebuilding. And I think it's important to underscore that the Obama administration came in with a resounding victory in 2009. And they got a number of things done that are being repealed. Limits on mortgage-backed securities, some degree of restraint in the financial sector. But what's happened, and you could feel it, is the move of the bright young things who want to get rich out of Wall Street to Silicon Valley, especially starting with the Facebook, then Facebook, not Meta, IPO. And since then, what you've had is the tech bros gain ascendance. What they're doing, and I think this whole discussion has underscored what they're doing, is to weaponize predatory practices against ordinary citizens. When I look at the things that are happening for the bottom 40% of the country, they are a rigged system. It used to be payday loan industry. We spent a lot of time condemning. I'm sure Mark has spent a lot of time suing. But now we've got employers figuring out ways to offer, in effect, payday loans to their employees who may not even realize that when the boss says you can get paid instead of once a month, once a week, that you're paying all the interest and fees that go with that. These are all small bore activities, but they add up. So what I've been teaching in my classes these days are reproductive rights. The incidence of maternal mortality in some states have doubled. When you look at life expectancy, it used to be red states and blue states weren't all that different. You go back 10 years, Connecticut, Oklahoma, we're a year or two apart. Now they're 5 years apart. And that's not because life expectancy has skyrocketed in Connecticut, but because all the things that they're doing are making life worse for people in red states. when you look at clean energy. And, we have to find a way to say anybody who talks about climate denialism, how much money did you get from big oil, from big energy? Every single one of them is getting a ton of money from big energy. And look what we're doing. So Trump has blown up global energy markets. All of a sudden, not only petroleum, but natural gas are much harder to get. And what is he doing? He's paying some French company $1 billion not to build the clean energy infrastructure that US was already contractually bound to fund. He is dismantling things. Who benefits? Russia. He wanted to release the sanctions on Russia before this war. So when we think about rebuilding, one of the things that's going on in the country right now is something very much like what happened around the time of the Civil War. And what was happening before the Civil War and what's happening after the Civil War is happening right now in tandem. What happened before the Civil War is the plantocracy in the South, which is a corrupt and inegalitarian group that oppressed white people as well as Black people, acquired a stranglehold on power in the South. The only people who got to positions of leadership had to entirely drink the Kool-Aid that enslavement is embedded in the Constitution, that the races are intrinsically unequal, and that God in the Bible ordained enslavement as the natural product of white supremacy. Okay? And when you do that, when you substitute an ideological test for a more pragmatic test, what you get is also what happened after the Civil War. So from the end of the Civil War through certainly the late 30s and into the war, the South was a backwater. You look at things like death threats. The North looked like Western Europe. The South looked like the developing world. And when you teased out what caused that, it was infectious diseases, not things like cancer, that explained the higher death rates in the South. What ended that? Well, a lot of the conditions between the North and the South began to converge around 1945. Because what the New Deal pioneered is what things like the Gates Foundation has done for the developing world: clean water, rural electrification, infrastructure development. The South didn't fund any of those things. It didn't even have state education systems before the Civil War, and it only reluctantly spent money after the Civil War because it might go to Black people. And so what you had was the South as this economic backwater in which whites were oppressed along with Blacks by the relative few in power who were appointed based on cronyism and ideology. And we're seeing the replication in those conditions now, certainly for the last couple decades, in red states, and an effort by Trump to try to destroy the infrastructures that make blue states relatively healthy and prosperous. And we have to repeat over and over again, why did the recovery from the financial crisis take so long? Wall Street acquired in 2011. Mitch McConnell and Jim Ryan blocked the kind of stimulus spending that worked in creating a recovery. And Donald Trump in 2016 benefited from Obama-era economic policies that would have benefited the nation much sooner had the Republican Party not blocked them. The policies of this party are, how can we make the United States ripe for predation, for the predator class, for the Epstein class, to rip off as many people as possible, impoverishing the country as a whole. When you look back at what Biden was able to do, Biden is actually, in terms of governance, one of the more successful presidencies in our lifetime. Certainly the most progressive president since Lyndon Johnson in infrastructure spending, in eliminating child poverty, in jumpstarting clean energy to make us competitive with the rest of the world. Forget about plastic straws. Think about the question, who is going to be prepared to withstand the oil shocks that are not going to be over, even if Trump gives up on bombing Iran in a couple of weeks? That rebuilding requires defeating the oligarchs and recognizing that the industry lobby runs the state legislatures, certainly throughout Red America, and has disproportionate power, not in getting things through, except for tax cuts for the wealthy, but rather in blocking the kinds of things where rural development, red state development would be the principal beneficiaries. So for the red states to prosper, it is necessary to defeat the oligarchs.
Wow. And Mr. Black, if you had the opportunity to be introduced tomorrow at No Kings by the boss, and he introduced you appropriately as being someone who has successfully been able to fight the oligarchy and the corruption for now decades, what would be your message to not just Minneapolis, but the American people writ large?
Right. So mine would be the message that you give to adults, that things are in tension, right? So absolutely what you heard, true, massive response of whistleblowers. And I would say from studying this internationally, this is unprecedented in the history of the world. And the United States, again, had before this more whistleblowers than the rest of the world combined. And now, as you've just heard, we have massively greater number of whistleblowers than we've ever had in the history. And as you pointed out, I came up with this slogan because of the obvious point. So the TSA slogan, right? If you see something, say something. And it stops there because everybody knows if you say, hey, there's this suitcase that's been there for 3 hours and nobody seems to be in control of it, that TSA isn't just going to go, okay, thanks for the information. They will actually send somebody promptly, and they will x-ray that and see that there's no bomb in it, or that it's just left inadvertently by someone in those circumstances. You don't have to say the next part, right? Because the next part is the government will do its job. But in the case of Michael Winston, for example, and Richard Bowen, we had people that had communicated directly with the robber barons, directly with the CEOs, and had immensely incriminating information that would make for superb criminal prosecutions of two of the most elite CEOs that drove the great financial crisis. And the government didn't even try to prosecute. Right? So, yes, it is a fabulous thing. And as a whistleblower myself, I just, as you know, love the efforts and love the response of the fellow Americans. But it is still the most lawless regime, the most corrupt regime in the history of the United States of America. So there are limits to what we can do as whistleblowers unless something happens. And then that thing is not going to happen as long as the robber barons have so much influence in both parties.
So really, I mean, it really comes down to if you see something, say something, but it's the responsibility of the public and all the rest of us, and wherever we happen to be, to make authorities do something with that information.
And that's
Not
the
always
third
easy.
line is, I think, the response of all of us who have actually blown, right? You're taught to do the right thing. You do the thing. You blow the whistle, and suddenly you're attacked.
Yeah.
And people are out to destroy you. So that's and then things got weird part of the response. And, again, God bless the efforts of this man and all of the whistleblowers that he and his team, it's not one person, for decades have assisted, right? And God bless the efforts of Grassley on the whistleblowers, but he's also attacked key whistleblowers in last couple of weeks. Humans are complicated. Humans are not perfect, right? Our saying in the savings and loan debacle was, it is not necessary to hope in order to persevere. And our second saying was, never chase mice while lions roam the campsite. And I know Lewis doesn't make, the second mistake. I doubt that he has quite the same approach we did, but we objectively felt our efforts were hopeless. And we were going to do it anyway. We felt it was not only hopeless, but that it would destroy our careers. And we did it anyway. And more to the point, as Michael Winston, Richard Bowen, even knowing what happened, they have told me personally, and I believe them, they would do it again today in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yep.
Paul, Mark, any final words?
No, I think this was a great conversation. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, and I'd like to just leave it with something that we should keep our eye on, and that is, there's been a federal court hearing in Georgia today, Atlanta, regarding the seizure of the ballots in Fulton County. And Abby Lowell, representing the Fulton County, has filed what's called a 41G motion, which is a motion for the return of property that has been seized either unconstitutionally or improperly. And there was a hearing that went on today. Abby Lowell called a number of witnesses. The government stood up and said, oh, the agent made a couple of mistakes, but they're small mistakes. And I don't think the judge, I don't know if the hearing's over, and I don't know if the judge came down with an opinion, but I think that's something to keep an eye on, because I think it could have an impact on what's going on across the country in these subpoenas and these search warrants for ballots, which I'm still not entirely sure what the government's up to. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. And then in closing, I'd like to say that June made a number of terrific points today. And one of the best points that she made, I think, was that when you have organizations that are run by all white males, you have either corruption or incompetence to blame for it. And as I look at this panel, I'm just wondering who the incompetent or corrupt one is. That's all. But anyway, no, thank you for this. I appreciate the time, Patrick.
Well, no, and guilty over on Heather. Thank God I'm surrounded by geniuses. But yeah, I just want to say in closing, yeah, and it's mind-boggling. Every week, these incredible people, with their wisdom and their integrity and their track records and their years and years of fighting on behalf of the American people, provide this insight that I think is the most important insight that I see anywhere in social media. We've got growing numbers. We need thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And I encourage, if anybody's out there who's a journalist and you want access and you want to talk to some of these folks, happy to introduce you, happy to create relationships. These people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 men, 1 woman. In June, if you want to bring in more women in the future, please let us know. But these guys are strategically, and I mean, they've already laid out, between what I just heard from with Lewis with the whistleblowers, and knowing what Bill has laid out by way of state legislatures and subpoenas, and Mark with the Bar Association, and just, the macro view, particularly from June's expertise, when you consider this hostile takeover of the United States government is basically everything that her expertise elicits, going back to Jack Welch and all things mergers and acquisitions of, the 80s and the go-go, that got us into this madness, and they destroyed the law in the process. These people have been there the entire time. They continue to deliver on behalf of the American people. I am honored. I am privileged to bring these folks to you every week. They are the new Untouchables. Please like, subscribe, and share. Please tell everybody you know about the new Untouchables, and please check out thenewuntouchables.com. Take a look in the description below with access and information about each one of these fine people, as well as check out, please, the Clean New Deal. On behalf of William K. Black, on Lewis Clark, Mark Dann, and Paul Pelletier, and of course, the home run hitter, June Carbone. My name is Patrick Lovell. Until next time, keep hope alive, but fight for freedom, liberty, and dignity, because that's what we do as Americans. Thank you. All the best.
Go Red Sox.